Chapter 4, Lesson 3, Comparing and Ordering Fractions and Decimals. So in Lesson 3, we're going to have to put fractions and decimals in order from least to greatest or from greatest to least. Just going to make sure you read the directions and see what they want you to do. Now before you can do this, you have to change all the fractions to a decimal. Once you do that, it's easier to compare which one's bigger than the other. So on all of these problems, you're going to have 2 fractions and 1 decimal. So your decimal, you don't have to do anything to. That one's already done. We just got to work on the other 2. So 4/5. Again, this is something you did back in Lesson 2, changing a fraction to a decimal. So we want to multiply this by 2. By 2, we're going to get 8/10. So as a decimal, this is going to be 0.8. And here, we leave the 1 the same, and that's going to be 9/10. So now we have all of our fractions into decimals. Now we can go ahead and line them up. So least to greatest, we want the smallest to biggest. So we can tell that 8/10 is the smallest. The next biggest would be 1 25/100 because the 2 is smaller than the 9. And then the biggest one would be 1.9 or 1 9/10. Now we put them in order, but we have to put them back in their original form. So, if you put them this way, this would be wrong. That is the order, but you have to put them back in their original form. So the smallest we said was 0.8 or 8/10, which is 4/5. So that one would be first. The next smallest was, or next biggest was 1.25. And then the biggest was 1.9, which is 1 9/10. So once you put them in decimal form, you find out which one is from least, the smallest, to the biggest. Then you have to put them back in their original form and put them back in the order that they ask. Again, this was least to greatest. Sometimes it'll be greatest to least. So we have 2 17/20ths, 2 75/100ths, and 2 4/5. So 2 0.75 is fine. We're going to go ahead and put this from least to greatest. So this one is 2.75. This will be 2.8 because times 2 times 2 is going to give us 8/10. This one's a little tricky. 20, we can reduce it to 10, but you can't reduce 17 to 10. So what we have to do is make this the next best thing, and that's 100. So your 2 stays the same. 20 times 5 is 100, and 17 times 5 is 85, which becomes 2.85 or 2 85/100. So looking at the numbers, if we put them in order, or we line up the decimals, and I'll only have one digit have a tenths place, I'm going to put a 0, so it's easier to compare. So we have the 2's, then we have 8, 7, and 8. So naturally, that one is the smallest. Look at the next numbers, and we got 5 and 0 smaller than 5. So that will be the next biggest, and the biggest. So 2.75, 2.8, and 2.85. So then we have to put those back in their original form and put them in order from least to greatest. So the first one was 2.75, and that one stays the same. The next biggest was 2.8, which is really 2 4/5. And the next biggest is 2.85, which originally was 2 17/20. We'll also have to compare fractions and decimals by saying which one is greater than and less than. So you'll have one fraction and one decimal. Just change that fraction to a decimal. A half, which we should know is 0.5. So 0.55 or 55 hundredths is bigger than 5/10. So let's take a look at your homework. Let's start with number 2, 9.08 and 9 1/5. 9 8 hundredths, 9 1/5. So let's change this one to a decimal. It's going to be 9 point and whatever this fraction is. So this one we can change our denominator to a 10. You get 2/10, which becomes 2/10. So if we line them up, we have 9.08 and 9.2, and we add a 0, so each one has a digit to compare. And 2 is bigger than 8, or 0. But overall, 20 is bigger than 8. So 9 1/5 is greater than 9.08 or 9 8 hundredths. Again, this was number 2. Number 6, 1 13/20 and 1.8. So 1.8 is done, 1 8/10. Now we have to change 1 13/20 to a decimal. Now you cannot reduce 13. We would like to change 20 into a 10, but you can't do just 1 without doing the numerator. So for this one, we're going to change it to 100. And we're going to get 65 over 100, which as a decimal would be 1.65 hundredths, because the 5 is in the hundredths place. So now we know that 1.8, add a 0, and it's really saying 80 is bigger than 65. So 1 8/10 is greater than 1 13/20. Let's take a look at number 10. This one has 4 numbers, and they want you to put them in order from least to greatest. 2 are already decimals, so we just have to change the other 2 fractions to decimals. So the first one is 3/10. That's just going to be 0.3, and 1 1/10 is just going to be 1.1. So I have 0.3, 0.75, 1.2, and 1.1. Again, it's nice to add the zeros so we can compare all the numbers together. So the smallest one we can see is going to be 0.3 or 3/10. Second, 75 hundredths. Third, 1.1 or 1 1/10. And the biggest one is going to be 1 2/10. So it looks like money. 30 cents, 75 cents, $1.20, $1.10. And again, we got to put them back in their original form. So the first one, 3/10. Second one, 0.75. The next one was 1/10, which was 1 1/10. And the greatest was 1.2. That is your answer for number 10. Let me fix this one for you.